Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you are watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. I was driving home late at night, a long straight stretch of prairie highway under the kind of sky that makes you feel like the world has emptied out. It wasn't my town we were coming from, just a place a few hours away where we had spent the day. My wife was in the passenger seat half awake, and our 3 kids were in the back, all of them asleep in that heavy, limp-way kids' sleep after a long day out. The road was dark except for the constant line of the headlights and the thin white reflection of the painted lines running ahead of me. I had been pushing the speed a bit, going around 100 just trying to get us home. There was no traffic at that hour, nothing but open land and night wind. That part of the prairies felt endless. No trees, no houses, no side roads except for the rare gravel turnoff that led to some farm too far away to see. When you're out there at night, it's hard not to feel like you're driving through a place where people aren't meant to be. The land is so flat and wide that sounds get swallowed before they travel, and it can feel like your car is the only thing left moving in the world. I remember blinking hard to keep my eyes fresh. The dashboard lights were the only warm color around me, a soft glow on the speedometer. My wife shifted, sat up a little, looked out into the dark. She had that look people get when they think something moved outside the edge of the headlights but aren't sure. That was when we saw the man. It happened fast. 1 second the road was empty. The next there was this figure standing off to the right side, just a few feet beyond the line, where the pavement dropped into gravel and dirt. He wasn't trying to hitchhike, wasn't waving his arms, didn't even seem to be watching the road. He looked like he was stumbling along it, like he had wandered out there without meaning to. His clothes were dark, messy, and he seemed unsteady, almost swaying. We passed him so fast that the shape of him blurred, but I still saw enough to know he didn't look right. He wasn't walking in a straight line. He didn't look aware of anything around him. Both of us turned our heads at the same time, like maybe the angle would help us see him better, but he vanished into the dark behind us as fast as he appeared. Right away, I felt that tight feeling in my chest, the one that comes when something doesn't make sense. Out there, 5,000 meters or more from the last town, no lights, no houses, no farms, no cars pulled over, just a man walking along the highway in the dark, like he wasn't even thinking about who might hit him. My wife said nothing, but I could feel her worry. It was the same as mine. Normally, when you see someone walking along a highway at night, you know what they're doing. Hitchhiking, heading to a broken down car, maybe just walking between nearby towns. But out here, with nothing for miles, it felt wrong. He looked like he was in trouble, sick, lost, maybe drunk, but it was something more than that. The way his body moved was off, slow and sloppy, like he was barely in control of his legs. I wanted to turn around right away, but that stretch of highway isn't built for sudden changes. There's no shoulder wide enough to flip a U, turn without risking rolling the car or getting stuck in a ditch. And with the kids asleep in the back, I didn't want to do anything stupid. So I kept driving until I spotted a turnoff, maybe a kilometer ahead. It was just a gravel road leading off into the dark. No sign, no house visible, just one of those roads used by farmers or people who worked the land during the day. I slowed down, turned onto it, then made a slow, careful turnaround, headlights sweeping across empty fields. The land felt even more empty from that angle, the horizon just a black line. When I got the car pointed back toward the highway, I drove faster than before, trying to get back to the spot where we had seen the man. The whole time, it felt like we were racing some invisible clock. 15 minutes passed between the moment we saw him and the moment we got back to that stretch of road. In that time, any number of things could have happened. He could have collapsed. He could have wandered into the fields. He could have been hit by another car that we never saw. The more time passed, the more I felt that pressure building in my chest. When we finally approached the spot, everything looked the same as before. Just flat prairie land, the road stretching out in both directions without a single landmark to break it up. I slowed down, scanning the shoulder for any shape at all. But there was nothing. No dark figure walking. No body on the ground. No tracks in the gravel. The land had swallowed him. We drove slowly for another half-kilometer in both directions, checking every ditch and every dark patch of grass, but we found nothing. The kids were still asleep, unaware of anything. My wife watched the road like she was waiting for something to step into the headlights. After a few minutes, I knew we weren't going to find him on our own. The prairies can hide a person fast. Even something as simple as a shallow dip in the ground can make someone vanish from sight. And we weren't sure of the exact spot anyway. When you're driving that fast, one stretch of road looks like the next. I pulled over and called the local police. It was a small detachment, the kind you find in towns with only a few streets and one gas station. I explained what happened, told them where we roughly were, told them the man looked sick or unsteady and might be in danger. The officer said he would meet us at the area and take a look. A few minutes later, his cruiser arrived. He stepped out, used a flashlight to check the grass in the ditch. I helped him look, scanning everything I could with my headlights, walking a bit along the road while trying not to go too far. It was quiet except for the wind, and the more we searched, the more that empty feeling crept into me. I knew the guy hadn't just disappeared into thin air, but it felt like he had. The officer said he would call for more help, maybe get another cruiser or two to sweep the area. He told me to take my family home since it was late and the kids needed rest. I didn't want to leave, but I also knew I couldn't help in any real way. It was open land. They had better lights and more time. I had 3 kids asleep in the back of the car and hours left to drive. I nodded, got in the car, and drove away. But the image of that man stumbling at the side of the road stayed with me the whole night. Even when we reached home, even when I carried the kids to their beds, I kept thinking about him. There's something unsettling about seeing someone alone at night, in a place where no one should be, and then not being able to find them again. The next morning, just after sunrise, my phone rang. It was the same officer. His voice sounded different, more awake, more serious. He told me they found the man. He was unconscious, lying in a patch of grass about 100 meters from the road. He had fallen into a diabetic coma. They got to him in time, pulled him out, got him to the hospital. He had been drinking earlier in the town we had passed, wandered out too far, lost track of where he was, and his blood sugar crashed. If nobody had seen him, he would have died out there in the open, alone on the prairie with no one to help. The officer said my call saved his life. I sat there for a long time after hanging up, thinking about that moment on the highway. 15 seconds of seeing a stranger in the dark, a quick blur at the edge of the headlights. It would have been easy to ignore it, to assume he was just another person walking. But that short moment, that flash of something out of place, was the difference between someone living and someone dying alone in a field in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes when I think about that night, I picture the land again, wide and empty, the road stretching out forever. I picture the man walking with that strange, unsteady sway, drifting toward the dark like he didn't know where he was going. And I picture those few seconds when our car happened to pass, when our headlights happened to hit him, and when 2 tired people in a speeding car decided that something didn't look right. Those seconds were enough. That tiny moment in the middle of the prairies, in the middle of the night, changed everything for a stranger we didn't know and will probably never meet. And every time I think about how easy it would have been to miss him, I feel that cold weight again, the one that settles into your chest when you realize how thin the line is between being seen and being lost forever. I had been making that same 3-hour drive for almost a year, going back and forth between my town and my boyfriend's college. I always tried to leave before it got too late, but that night I lost track of time. By the time I pulled onto the expressway, the sky was already a thick, heavy darkness. That kind of rural darkness where even the moon looks muted and the outline of the trees becomes nothing but jagged shadows moving in and out of the edges of your headlights. My friend was with me because she didn't want to stay alone that weekend, but she'd had too much to drink at a small get-together before we left. She giggled at nothing and leaned her head against the window while I drove. I kept the radio low and focused on the lane markers because the road felt endless at night, like one long black hallway. For the first hour, everything was quiet, except for the low hum of the tires and the occasional rumble when a truck passed me going the opposite way. The expressway ran through a long stretch of farmland, the kind with open fields on both sides. No streetlights, no exits for miles at a time. The darkness pressed in so close it felt like driving through a tunnel. I kept checking the gas gauge, even though I had filled up before leaving. It was just something I did when the night made me restless. I was thinking about how far I had left to go when the wheel started to shake. It wasn't subtle. The whole front of the car began to thrum like something was loose inside it. The steering wheel vibrated in my hands in a way that felt wrong, not like the bumps in the pavement or a rough patch. I slowed down, and for a moment I thought maybe the road was uneven. But the shaking only got worse. I glanced up at the passenger mirror and didn't see anything strange behind me. No smoke or sparks. But the way the car pulled slightly to the right made my stomach flip. I remember thinking that if the tire blew completely at that speed, I'd lose control, and the idea of crashing in the middle of nowhere with a drunk friend made my chest tighten. I eased onto the shoulder and flicked on the hazard lights. The sudden quiet after the engine dropped to idle made everything outside seem even darker. My friend mumbled something but stayed slumped in the seat. I sat there gripping the wheel, trying to breathe normally. I hated stopping in isolated places at night, but I didn't have a choice. I needed light, and I needed a safe place to pull over. When I looked ahead, I noticed a blue sign reflecting faintly in my headlights. A rest stop was coming up. I didn't even remember one being there, but I wasn't going to question it. I put on my turn signal, even though there was no one else on the road, and crept the car forward onto the small exit ramp. The rest stop looked old and half abandoned. One long building with vending machines, bathrooms, and a few parking spaces scattered around. A couple of dim lights flickered near the front, but most of the lot was swallowed in darkness. I pulled into a space close to the building, where at least one of the lights stayed on, even if it buzzed like it was struggling to stay alive. My hazards blinked in an uneven rhythm, painting the asphalt in slow bursts of orange. I got out and the cold hit me first. The air felt heavier than it should have for that time of year, as if the trees around the lot were holding their breath. My tire was almost flat. The rubber squashed under the rim, and I felt a small wave of anger at myself for not stopping sooner. I knew how to change a tire. I had done it before, but doing it in the dark with poor lighting and a half-useful friend wasn't ideal. Still, I opened the trunk and lifted the mat to get to the jack and the spare. My hands shook a little, not from the cold but from the tension of the whole situation. I had just gotten the tools out when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around fast, heart jumping up into my throat. Two men were walking over from a direction I hadn't noticed, like from the far end of the lot where the light didn't reach. They looked like they might have been traveling too, maybe truckers or guys who had been resting in their car. But I didn't see any vehicle at first glance. My instinct went tight and alert, but I tried not to show it. They came closer and I could see they weren't old, maybe late 20s or early 30s. Nothing physically threatening on the surface, but the fact that anyone was wandering around a rural rest stop at that hour made me nervous. Still, I needed help, and I didn't want to refuse it in a way that might make things worse. I stepped back a little to give them space to look at the tire. They crouched down like they knew what they were doing, but within seconds it became obvious they didn't. One tried to fit the jack under the car in the wrong place. The other spun the lug wrench in his hands like he wasn't sure which way it was supposed to go. I felt more tension standing there watching them than when I was alone. I tried to gently take over, trying to show them step by step, but they kept reaching for things in a clumsy way. I wanted them to leave, but I didn't know how to make that happen without sounding rude or creating a weird scene in the middle of the night. Then my friend opened the passenger door and stumbled out. She stretched her arms like she was waking from a nap, and then started talking at the two guys, her words slurring together. I felt a flash of panic ripple through me. She was too friendly, too loose, and the guys shifted their attention toward her in a way that made everything feel even more wrong. I guided her back toward the car, trying to keep my tone calm, trying to get her inside without making a show of it. She resisted in that lazy drunk way, dragging her feet, laughing under her breath. It took longer than it should have, but I finally got her back into the seat and closed the door. When I turned around again, the two men were standing closer than before. Not close enough to touch me, but enough that I felt boxed in. I told them I appreciated the attempt, but I could finish it. They didn't move right away. That moment, those few seconds when they didn't step back, is something I still remember too clearly. It made the air around me feel wrong, like something was about to shift in a way I couldn't control. Before I could say anything else, I noticed a faint pair of headlights sliding across the pavement from the far back corner of the lot. A car I had not seen earlier, tucked so far into the shadows that it might as well have been invisible. It moved slowly, not fast, but with the kind of steady direction that made it impossible to ignore. The two men looked over their shoulders at it, and something changed in their posture. They didn't say a word, didn't even look at me again. They just hurried away. Not a walk, not a casual move. They left like they had somewhere else they suddenly needed to be. They got into a dark car parked beyond the reach of the lights, and within a few seconds they drove off down the exit ramp back toward the expressway. The new car pulled up a few spaces away from me. Two men got out, older than the first pair, calmer somehow. They didn't look at me with curiosity or interest, more like they already knew what was happening. They didn't ask questions or say anything. They simply walked over, looked at the tire, positioned the jack correctly, loosened the lug nuts with steady hands, and worked with a kind of quiet efficiency that made the whole situation feel different. My friend stayed in the car this time, watching through the window. I stood there with my arms crossed, not in a defensive way, but because I didn't know what else to do. I watched them swap the flat for the spare with a speed that made me wonder how many times they had done it before. The sound of metal clicking into place and the soft scrape of their movements was the only noise in the whole rest stop. No cars passed on the expressway. No insects buzzed near the lights. It was all strangely still. When they finished, they lowered the car and tightened everything again. I said thank you, the only thing I could say, and both of them just gave me small nods. No smile, no wave. They got back into their car and drove away the same direction they came from, disappearing into the dark corner before pulling out onto the road. I stood there for a long moment before getting into my car. My hands shook again, but for a different reason. The first pair had left too fast when the second car arrived. The second pair had worked with silent purpose. I didn't know if they knew the first two, or if they had been watching, or if they had just arrived at the right moment. I still don't know. I drove home slowly, both hands tight on the wheel, checking the mirrors more often than usual. My friend sobered up halfway through the drive, confused why I was so tense. I didn't explain much until we were almost home, and even then I kept most of it to myself. It's been more than 20 years now, and I still think about those men, not the first two, the ones who made my skin crawl, even though they hardly did anything. I think about the two who pulled up from the shadows, the ones who changed my tire without a word. I never saw their faces clearly. I don't know their names or where they came from or what made them stop. Maybe they were just passing through. Maybe they had been resting there a long time. Maybe they saw something I didn't. But I remember the way they worked, the calmness of it, the quiet focus. I remember the way the first two left the instant they arrived, and I remember how the air felt less dangerous once they stepped into the circle of dim light around my car. I don't know who they were, but I hope they lived good lives after that night. I hope they helped other people the way they helped me. I still carry that moment with me whenever I drive alone late at night, and even though the memory scares me, the ending is something I'm grateful for. They didn't ask for anything, didn't linger, didn't try to make it into a story. They just did the job I needed and left. And because of that, I made it home safely. That was the only ending I needed. I started that drive already tired. I was 20 broke and stubborn enough to think I could handle an 8-hour trip home after a long day. I couldn't afford a motel, and even if I could, I probably would have talked myself out of it. The plan was to make it straight through, get home by maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, crash in my own bed, and deal with everything else later. The accident on the expressway changed everything. Traffic stopped for almost an hour. Emergency lights flashed across the trees, and I sat in a line of cars with the window cracked, listening to engines idle and watching the time slip away. By the time I finally got moving again, it was close to 11 p.m., and I still had 4 hours left. The road ahead was pitch black, the kind of dark that eats the edges of your headlights. For the first hour, I thought nothing of the car behind me. It wasn't tailgating or acting strange. It kept a normal distance. On a long stretch of rural highway with almost no exits, cars just naturally stack up behind each other. Still, something about the steady presence of its headlights in my rearview mirror made me adjust the mirror more than usual. I told myself it was nothing. Just another late night driver heading north. My eyes were getting heavy, so when a gas station showed up like a tiny island of light on the side of the road, I pulled in. It wasn't even a full station. Just 2 pumps, a small store with flickering fluorescent lights, and a vending machine leaning against the wall, like someone forgot to move it 10 years ago. I parked and went inside to grab an energy drink. When I came back out, I noticed the same car parked across the road. No one stepped out, no movement at all. I told myself again that it was nothing. Maybe they were making a phone call or checking directions. Maybe they didn't want to go inside. I shrugged it off, got back into my car and pulled out. The car across the road waited a few seconds, then pulled out too, falling right back in behind me. That was the first moment my stomach tightened a little. Not full fear yet, just that uneasy twist that tells you something is off. I tried to push it down and focus on the road. The energy drink worked its way into my system, and for a while I felt more awake. Forest on both sides, no towns, no houses, no lights except my headlights and the steady beam behind me. I kept glancing in the mirror without meaning to. After another hour, I really had to use the bathroom. Another rest stop came up, just a small turnout with a couple of vending machines and a single building with bathrooms. No cars, no people, just the soft hum of the lights inside the shelter. I slowed down and pulled in. The car behind me didn't pull in. It stopped at the entrance to the rest area, just sat there with its engine running, headlights facing the highway. It didn't move. Didn't back up, didn't drive away, just stayed. That was the first time real fear hit me. It was cold, quick, and sharp. I sat in my car with the door open, staring at the vehicle waiting at the entrance. My whole body felt tense, like every muscle had pulled tight at the same time. I didn't even get out. I shut the door again and pulled back onto the road because something in me said it wasn't safe. Once I was back up to speed, I kept checking the mirror. The car waited, then merged back onto the highway, falling in behind me like it had never stopped. At that point, I needed to know if I was imagining it or not. Maybe the driver really did just happen to be going the same way. Maybe I was letting the dark get to me. To test it, I pulled into one of the small gravel pull-outs on the right. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my hands. The other car didn't pull into the same one. Instead, it eased into the pull out on the opposite side of the road. The engine stayed on. No one got out. No window rolled down. Nothing. Just the bright glow of headlights reflecting off the trees. That was enough for me. I didn't wait. I pulled back out onto the highway again and kept my speed steady. The car did the same, even from a distance. I could see its headlights trailing behind me, like something glued to my bumper by an invisible line. I was almost 2 hours from home, and there was nothing around me except endless black forest. I kept glancing at every road sign, counting down miles, trying to steady my breathing. Every time the road curved, I checked if the headlights were still there. Every time I crested a hill, I waited to see if they'd reappear. And every time they did. By the time I reached the outskirts of my town, I was shaking. My fingers hurt from how tightly I'd been gripping the wheel. I called my parents the moment I saw the first familiar streetlights. I didn't explain much. just enough for them to know I wasn't imagining it. They told me to drive downtown and make 4 left turns in a row. A simple box, a loop, a test. I did exactly what they said. 1 left turn. The headlights followed. 2nd left turn. Still behind me. 3rd, no change. 4th, the car was still there, turning with me like it was connected by a rope. The fear at that point felt heavy, like it filled the air inside my car. My parents told me to drive to the police station. I didn't hesitate. I headed straight for it, passing dark shops, empty sidewalks, and rows of parked cars that all looked the same in the yellow streetlights. When I turned into the parking lot of the police station, the car behind me didn't slow down. It sped up. A sudden burst of acceleration, tires screaming against the pavement. It shot past the entrance, weaving across the empty road, and disappeared into the dark, going at least 50 over the limit. The sound of its engine echoed off the buildings, then faded. Inside the station, I told the officers everything. They sent out a patrol car, took down details, asked me for the make and color. I answered as best I could, but in the dark, with my nerves shot, all I could give them was a general description. They said they'd look around. I never heard anything back. No call, no follow-up, nothing. I got home that night shaking so hard I had to sit in the driveway before going inside. My whole body felt drained, like the fear had wrung me out. I lay awake for hours, replaying every moment, every turn, every time those headlights stayed behind me. Even now, years later, anytime a car follows me for more than a few minutes at night, I feel that old fear creep up again. It's a quiet fear, but strong. The kind that reminds you how quickly a normal night can turn into something you never forget. I still don't know who was in that car or what they wanted. I only know they chose to follow me for hours through empty roads, pulling over when I did, stopping when I did, watching without ever stepping out. And that's what makes it terrifying. Not knowing, not understanding, just the steady, silent presence of someone who had their own reason to shadow me through the night. And how close I came to being completely alone with them, if I had made one wrong choice. I was about 20 when this happened, maybe a little younger, but old enough to think I knew how to handle myself during long night drives. Back then I was in college about 4 hours from my hometown, and every few weeks I'd make the trip back for a weekend. I always liked the drive in daylight, the long stretches of empty road, the slow roll of fields and trees, the way the sky opened up once you got far enough from campus. But at night those same roads turned into something else. They weren't welcoming or peaceful. They were just dark, empty, and quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. My mom lived far outside the city on a ranch house tucked in the countryside, and getting to it meant passing miles of country road, where you might not see another car for 20 or 30 minutes at a time. That night I'd been out with friends doing one of those late night glow bowling events where the music is loud, the lights are strange colors, and everyone is half awake but buzzing from it. It ended late, much later than I intended. I said my goodbyes, got in my car, and started the familiar drive back to my mom's place. I remember feeling a little tired, that heavy, slow kind of tired that settles behind your eyes, but I wasn't sleepy enough to pull over or anything. I just wanted to get home, get in bed, and enjoy the quiet of her house, far from campus noise. The first hour was nothing unusual. The city lights faded behind me, the road narrowed, the houses thinned out, and eventually I was in the countryside, where the only light came from my headlights and the occasional reflective road sign. The sky was almost black, no moon that I could see, and the air had that stillness that only comes late at night in rural areas. No wind, no movement, just the hum of my tires. I didn't notice the other car at first. Not because I wasn't paying attention, but because it hadn't been there 1 second, and then suddenly it was. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw headlights far behind me, too far to think anything of. But then they got closer. Not fast, not aggressive at first. Just gaining. I figured it was some local heading home who wanted to get around me. The road had plenty of space for that. But the car didn't pass. It slowed until it matched my speed exactly, right behind me, maybe 2 or 3 car lengths back. I kept driving, waiting for the moment it would move into the other lane and go around, but that moment didn't come. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself there was no reason to assume anything bad. It was late. Maybe the driver was tired or unfamiliar with the road. I tried to focus on my own driving. A couple of minutes passed before I realized the car was drifting left and right behind me. Not enough to cross a line, but enough that it looked wrong. That slow, deliberate weaving that makes your chest tighten a little. At first I thought, maybe the person was drunk and trying to keep themselves awake. But then it kept happening, over and over, and the car crept closer until it was too close for comfort. Close enough that I could see the shape of the hood and the headlights. The road was still completely empty. No houses, no gas stations, no streetlights, no other drivers. Just me and this swerving car glued to my bumper on a pitch, black country road at 2 a.m. My stomach dropped. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Every instinct in me went straight to fear. I sped up a little, not enough to look panicked, just enough to put some space between us. The car matched my speed. I slowed down slightly. It slowed too. Its headlights shifted slightly left and then right, that slow weaving never stopping. I kept driving, but my brain had started to race. There was no way I was going home with someone like that behind me. I wasn't about to lead a stranger, drunk or otherwise, straight to the house where my mom lived alone. I didn't want them knowing where I stayed. I didn't want them following me up that long driveway where there were no neighbors and no one awake. I made the first turn I could, even though it took me off my normal route. A sharp right onto another empty road. The car followed so closely that its headlights swung in the mirror the second I turned, like it anticipated it. That felt worse than the swerving. I tried again at the next intersection. A left, then another right. I drove in circles, making unnecessary turns, looping through areas I barely knew. The car never hesitated. It never slowed. It never tried to pass. It stuck to me like it was tethered. The longer it went on, the more real the fear became. I could feel it in my jaw and my shoulders, in the way the back of my neck tingled every time I checked the mirror. The road ahead was endless black, but behind me those headlights kept shaking, creeping, weaving as if the driver wanted me to know they were still there. After several minutes of trying to lose him, I realized I had no plan. I was just turning randomly, hoping something would change. The country roads weren't going to help me. They were too dark, too empty, too easy for someone to trap you on. I needed light. I needed speed. I needed the city. So I stopped trying to lose him on back roads and headed toward the main highway that led back into town. It was still early morning, probably around 2 or 3, but I knew the highway would at least have streetlights, maybe a truck or two, maybe enough visibility to make the situation feel less suffocating. The car stayed on me the entire way. When the road widened, it didn't try to pass. When the speed limit increased, it matched me. When I tried slowing down abruptly to see if it would go around, it slowed within a second, keeping that same distance and weaving like it was taunting me. I merged onto the highway, heart pounding, palms sweating. The streetlights overhead made the whole situation feel sharper, more defined. I could see the car clearly in the mirror now, not the driver, but the shape of the vehicle. Just a dark sedan, nothing unusual. Something you'd see every day in a normal situation. But nothing about this was normal. I stayed in the fast lane, going faster than I should have, hoping the car behind me wasn't willing to keep up at unsafe speeds. But it did. Every time I accelerated, it accelerated. Every time I tried to ease off the gas, its headlights pressed closer, filling my mirror. It followed me like that for miles. I don't even know how many. Time felt stretched out and strange. I wasn't thinking clearly anymore, just reacting, gripping the wheel, staring ahead, glancing back every few seconds. Then, without thinking it through at all, I made a move that could have caused a wreck if anyone else had been around. I jerked the wheel and swerved across all the lanes toward an exit that came up on my right. I didn't signal. I didn't slow down. I just cut across the lanes and shot down the ramp, praying the driver behind me wouldn't be able to react in time. In the mirror, I saw the headlights shift sharply, like the driver had tried to follow, but they overshot it. They went past the exit at highway speed. The car kept going straight. I watched the lights shrink as it moved farther down the road. When it disappeared over the rise, the relief hit me so hard it made my chest ache. But the fear didn't go away, not even close. I sped through town, heart still pounding, hands still shaking. I took side streets. I checked every mirror constantly. Every set of headlights behind me made my skin crawl. Every red light made me bounce my leg like I was trying to shake off the lingering panic. When I finally got back to my mom's driveway, I sat in the car for a minute, engine running, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine and the faint ringing in my ears. My whole body felt like it was made of buzzing wires. I kept looking down the road, waiting for headlights that never appeared. Inside the house, it was quiet, the kind of deep country quiet where the only sound is the refrigerator and your own breathing. I should have felt safe. Instead, I closed every curtain, locked every door twice, and turned on more lights than I needed. I lay in bed with my heart still racing long after the house went still. The strange thing is, nothing ever came of it. I never saw the car again, or at least not knowingly. I never found out who was driving, or what they wanted, or why they stayed glued to me for so long on those empty roads. There was no explanation waiting later, no news story, no police notice, nothing. Just me, those dark country roads, and a swerving car that seemed to have no purpose except to follow me until I forced it away. Even now, years later, I still feel a knot in my stomach when I drive those same roads at night. Every time I make the turn off the highway and the lights fade behind me, I think about those weaving headlights in my mirror. I think about how alone the road felt. I think about how easily things could have gone differently if I had panicked at the wrong moment or slowed down too much. It changed the way I feel about night driving forever. I still make that trip sometimes, but I don't relax on those roads anymore. I don't trust the quiet. I don't trust the emptiness. And I don't trust the feeling of headlights behind me, no matter how normal they look. That night taught me how fast a normal drive can turn into something you never forget, something that stays with you long after the car disappears into the darkness and the road returns to silence. I had been doing on-call IT support around nuclear stations for a few years by then, long enough to get used to the late night phone calls and the long drives, but not long enough to stop dreading them. It was always the same pattern. The phone buzzed while I was half asleep, the duty manager's message sitting there, short and cold. A server had gone down at Hashem on the opposite side of the country. No remote access, no backup route, attend site. That was all I ever got. So I dragged myself out of bed, still foggy with the kind of tiredness that makes the air feel thick, got dressed in whatever clothes were closest to the radiator, and went out into the cold night to start the drive. The roads were empty at that time. The northeast coast felt like a different world after midnight. Shop windows black, houses dark, only the streetlights humming overhead. I remember thinking how dead everything looked while I rolled past the same petrol stations and roundabouts I had memorized from every other call-out. Once I hit the motorway, there was nothing to do but sit in that tunnel of headlights and wait for the miles to pass. My brain felt like it was running through syrup. I kept checking the clock on the dashboard, even though I already knew the drive would take hours. My heater was blowing warm air straight at my face, trying to keep me awake. My coat was bunched up under my left leg. I kept shifting around trying to get comfortable. By the time I got to Hashem, the wind from the Irish Sea was blowing hard enough to push against the car doors. The station sat there in its usual grim silence, security lights glowing like pale moons against the concrete. I went through the checks, walked across the site with my ID badge slapping against my chest, and spent the next hour buried in the server room, sorting out a network issue that probably could have been prevented if someone had done proper patching. It always annoyed me how the worst jobs came at the worst times. When the last machine finally pinged back online and everything started behaving again, I felt that foggy wave of relief that comes when you know the hardest part is done, but you're still hours away from sleep. The time was around 3 a.m. when I got back in the car. The sky was black and flat. No moonlight. Just that kind of heavy night where you can't see the shape of anything beyond the reach of your headlights. I was already imagining how good my bed would feel when I got home, but I knew the route would take me across the moors. I had done it before, and it was never pleasant even in daylight. It wasn't the kind of place where you wanted to break down or stop for any reason. Just open emptiness. Miles of it. The road leading out of the coastal town was quiet, only the occasional light from a farmhouse window far out in the fields. When I reached the turnoff that led into the back roads, everything outside the car seemed to disappear. The hedges on either side crept in close in the road, narrowed until it felt like I was driving through a tunnel. The wind was strong enough to push the car slightly sideways whenever I came round a bend. My headlights were the only thing showing me where the tarmac ended and the rough grass began. I was tired enough that every small noise in the car seemed louder than usual. The rattle of something in the boot, the tires humming against the surface, the faint tick from the dashboard. Eventually, the hedges gave way to open moorland. It was like driving straight into nothing. No houses, no streetlights, no buildings. Just the endless rise and fall of the moors stretching away into the dark. I couldn't see the hills, only the faint shape of them in the black sky. The wind was stronger up there, hitting the car with long, uneven gusts. I kept both hands on the steering wheel, trying not to let the tiredness win. That was when I saw something out to my right. It was so quick that I couldn't be sure I had really seen anything at all. Just a flash, like the brief reflection of something catching my headlights, even though there was nothing out there to catch them. I looked again, squinting through the side window, but everything was just dark and flat. I kept driving, trying to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Lack of sleep, or a bit of reflective debris someone had dropped out on the moor. The kind of harmless explanation that made sense. A minute later, I saw it again, this time clearer. A small, faint glow off to the right, greenish pale like a dying LED light. It moved slowly, disappearing and then showing again for half a second. I frowned, leaning forward in the seat even though it didn't help. I didn't know what the hell it was. Nothing should have been out there at that time of night. The nearest building was miles away. The fields were empty, the ground uneven. There shouldn't have been anything glowing. I kept going, thinking maybe it was a piece of farm equipment or a distant quad bike, something with a failing light. But then another glow appeared. Then another, and another. They were scattered, drifting, and then fading. And they looked higher off the ground than any machine would be. Almost level with the height of my windows. Almost like they were floating. My pulse picked up. I wasn't usually the type to get spooked on night drives, but there was something wrong about the way those lights appeared and moved. They didn't behave like headlights or torches or anything mechanical. They came in and out as if they were blinking or responding to something or searching. I tried to keep my eyes on the road, but I kept glancing right, watching the glows multiply. There were 6 or 7 now, maybe more. Each time they came back, they seemed slightly closer to the road, moving in slow arcs, slipping behind shapes I couldn't see. And the longer I watched them, the more I realized they were drifting diagonally toward me, like they were following the same path I was taking but from the side. My throat went dry. My hands tightened on the wheel. Every instinct I had was starting to wake up, even though my brain kept scrambling for a rational explanation. I turned the heater down because suddenly the car felt too warm. The windows were fogging slightly at the corners. I wiped them with the back of my hand, trying to focus on the tarmac curves ahead. The road twisted and dipped, forcing me to slow. I didn't want to stop, not for anything. But my speed dropped without me thinking about it, the same way your body reacts when you sense something out of place. The lights kept edging closer, brightening whenever they appeared. They were definitely green now, not white or blue, but a dull, eerie green like something chemical or unnatural. They bobbed gently as if they were hanging from invisible threads. Every time I blinked, they seemed to shift. At that point, I could feel the fear tightening inside my chest. That kind of fear you don't admit to out loud, because it sounds ridiculous. My imagination started going places it shouldn't go. I kept telling myself I was just exhausted, that it was nothing dangerous, but my mind kept jumping to the worst possibilities. I felt a little sick. The lights had reached the edge of the road. They were maybe 10 or 15 meters ahead, right along the grass line. I slowed more than I meant to. I realized I was leaning forward, elbows locked, breathing shallow. My headlights hit a rise in the road, bounced slightly, and all the little green lights flared brighter for a moment. They seemed to dance. I thought about stopping, then immediately thought no. Stopping was the last thing I was going to do. I kept crawling forward, my heart pounding, everything in me ready for something to step or float or drop into my path. And that was exactly when it happened. Out of the darkness, 4 shapes burst directly across the tarmac in front of me. My foot slammed the brake so hard the seatbelt locked across my chest. The tires screeched against the rough surface, and the whole car jolted violently. For a moment, all I could see were pale bodies moving fast in front of the bonnet. Loud, heavy thumps of hooves, wool flashing in the beam of my headlights, sheep. Just 4 sheep, running across the road like they were late for something. Their eyes reflected my headlights, with that same greenish flare I'd been seeing the whole time. Every single one of those lights had been nothing more than the reflections of sheep standing scattered across the moor, turning their heads as I approached. I sat there, chest tight, hands shaking against the wheel. My breath came out in a long, shaky rush, the kind of breath you don't realize you've been holding. I let my head fall back against the headrest. My pulse felt like a hammer in my ears. I felt stupid, completely ridiculous, but I was so relieved I almost laughed. And then I actually did laugh, a tired, broken laugh that filled the car more than I meant it to. Everything I had imagined vanished in an instant, replaced by that absurd image of 4 sheep sprinting across the road like escape artists. I kept driving after that, a bit slower but lighter, almost embarrassed even though no one had seen me. The road seemed less threatening once the truth settled in. The moors were still dark and empty, but they weren't full of floating lights anymore. Just animals wandering around in the middle of the night, doing what sheep do. By the time I reached the main road again, the sky had started to glow faintly with the first hint of dawn. I could finally feel the weight of the night starting to lift. I thought about how fear works, how your brain fills in gaps when you're tired and alone in a place you don't know well. I had gone from imagining something dangerous closing in on me to watching 4 confused sheep bolt across the road. It made me realize how easy it is to let the dark twist things into shapes they aren't. When I finally got home, the whole night already felt like a strange dream. But the moment when those lights moved across the moor toward me stayed in my mind for a long time. Not because of what they were, but because of what I thought they were. I kept replaying it, the way the fear built slowly until it felt real enough to touch. It reminded me how thin that line is between normal and terrifying, especially when you're alone on a back road at 3 a.m. with miles of empty land around you. And in the end, it was nothing more than sheep. Real, ordinary, harmless sheep. But that night, out on those moors, in that darkness, those sheep had scared me more than anything else ever had. I remember that night vividly, though I've tried to forget it many times over the years. It started as a simple drive, nothing unusual at all. I had finished a long day at work and decided to take the back roads home, the ones that cut through the countryside, thinking it would be a quiet, relaxing way to end the evening. It was late, around 11:30, and the sky was dark without a hint of moonlight. The streetlights were sparse, and the occasional glow from a farmhouse in the distance barely lit the edges of the road. The air was cool and smelled faintly of damp earth, the lingering smell of rain from earlier in the day. I had the radio low, mostly just the static and the occasional song drifting in and out, nothing to really focus on. The road was narrow, only wide enough for 2 cars, with deep ditches on either side and tall grass brushing the edge of the asphalt. Trees leaned in over the road, their bare branches scraping against each other, making low scratching noises whenever a breeze stirred them. I had driven this route before dozens of times, and I knew every curve and rise. But that night, everything felt different. The familiar shapes of the trees and fence posts seemed slightly off, like shadows stretched too long, or colors that were darker than they should have been. I remember feeling a small shiver as I turned into a long stretch of road lined with old wooden fences. The paint was chipped and faded, some posts leaning at odd angles. There were no other cars, no lights in any of the houses that I passed, only the faint hum of my tires against the asphalt. Somewhere up ahead, a piece of trash skittered across the road, catching the headlights for just a second before it disappeared into the darkness. It was the kind of night where every small sound or movement felt larger than it should. As I drove further, the road narrowed even more, and the trees grew thicker, arching overhead like a tunnel. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating patches of grass and the occasional cracked sign. I kept my eyes on the road, but I couldn't stop glancing at the shadows that moved along the edges of the forest. There was no one there, I knew that, but my mind seemed to insist that something was. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself it was just fatigue, maybe the low-level stress from the week settling in. My hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, and I forced myself to slow down. Halfway through this stretch, I noticed something strange. A figure standing just off the side of the road, barely visible in the dark. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe someone walking home or waiting for a ride. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't moving, just standing there silent, slightly hunched. My pulse quickened. There shouldn't have been anyone out here at this hour. I considered stopping, but something inside me said to keep going. I passed it slowly, careful not to swerve. The figure didn't move. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, expecting it to vanish, or maybe to see it stepping onto the road, but it stayed where it was. A few minutes later, I hit a patch of fog. It wasn't thick, just a thin layer that clung low to the ground, making the road ahead look hazy. My headlights cut through it, but the effect was disorienting. The edges of the road seemed to blur, the trees looking like dark shapes melting into the fog. I slowed further, the engine quiet except for the soft whir of the tires on wet asphalt. I remember noticing how loud every sound was. The rustling of leaves, the snapping of small branches, even the hum of the car seemed amplified. I was tense, aware of every little movement around me. Then, something happened that made me freeze. Out of the fog, I saw a shape move across the road ahead. It wasn't fast, just a slow, deliberate crossing. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer. But then I saw the outline, the way it stood. I braked, my heart hammering. The figure froze as I slowed to a stop, barely a car length away. My headlights didn't illuminate it clearly, but I could make out a man, tall, wearing dark clothes, walking across the road without looking my way. I sat there, holding my breath, afraid to move. When he reached the other side, he disappeared into the trees, almost swallowed by the darkness. I stayed put for a long moment, watching the spot where he vanished, my chest tight. Eventually, I forced myself to start moving again, keeping my speed very low. I checked every mirror, every shadow. Every time a tree branch scraped against the car, I flinched. I told myself over and over it was just someone out for a walk, maybe a lost traveler. But the thought didn't comfort me. It was the silence that got to me. The kind of silence that felt heavy, like it was pressing down on the car from all sides. The last stretch of road was a slight uphill, winding to meet the main highway. I was exhausted, tense, gripping the wheel with white knuckles. Then, just as I crested the final hill, I saw headlights approaching from the opposite direction. I felt a strange relief, the sight of another car bringing a sense of safety. The driver slowed as they passed, giving me a nod, or maybe just glancing at me. I realized that the normal world was waiting just ahead, lights from distant towns, the faint hum of other vehicles, the smell of fuel and asphalt. As soon as I reached the main highway, the tension started to drain from my body. The wide road, the steady lanes, the regular signs, it all felt safe. I accelerated slightly, keeping a cautious eye on the rearview mirror. The sense of being alone, of driving through something almost forgotten by the world, started to fade. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was shaking, still tense, but safe. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood. The street was lit, the houses familiar, the world orderly and safe. That night, I learned something about fear. It isn't always about danger you can see, but about the uncertainty, the isolation, the way darkness can twist familiar things into something that feels unfamiliar and threatening. I realized that the road, the trees, the shadows, they were just the road, the trees, the shadows. The tension was mine to carry, and once I got home, closed the door behind me, and breathed deeply, it stayed behind, outside in the dark. I went inside, turned on every light, and finally allowed myself to relax. The night had been scary, but I had made it through. I had faced the darkness and the silence, and I arrived safely, reminding myself that sometimes the worst things are the ones our mind builds when we are alone in the dark. It wasn't a fairy tale, it wasn't a ghost story, and nothing unexplainable happened. It was just a night, a drive, a stretch of empty road that played tricks on my mind. But surviving it felt like a victory. By the time I went to bed, the tension had faded completely, leaving only the memory of fear and the relief of safety. I closed my eyes, listening to the quiet of my house, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't felt for hours. And for the first time that night, I felt truly at peace. It was late, much later than I usually drove, but I had taken a detour to avoid the city traffic and found myself on the old highway, the kind of road that had been there long before the highways we now rely on, the one that stretched straight for miles, cracked and faded, with lines that had long since lost their brightness. The pavement was uneven in places, with small dips and potholes that jostled the car as I drove. Streetlights were few and far between, most of them flickering weakly or completely dead, leaving long stretches of darkness that swallowed the edges of the road. The air was cold, the kind that made your chest tighten a little and your fingers go numb if you left them resting on the steering wheel too long. I had my heater on, but it only helped so much against the chill that came from the windows and the drafty gaps in the old car. The tires crunched over loose gravel at the edge of the lane whenever I drifted slightly off course. I could hear the faint hum of insects from the fields on either side, and the occasional rustle of dry leaves in the wind. Nothing about the place felt alive, and yet it felt like something was waiting just beyond the edge of the headlights. The highway curved occasionally, shallow sweeps that revealed more darkness ahead. Trees lined the sides of the road, gnarled and close enough that it felt like the forest leaned toward the pavement watching. I kept my speed slow, around 45 miles per hour, because there were no other cars in sight, and I didn't want to risk sliding over the uneven surface. I passed the skeleton of an old gas station with boarded windows and a rusted sign swinging in the wind. Its shadowy outline disappeared quickly behind me, leaving me in more darkness. Somewhere along the way, I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, like wet dirt and decaying leaves, but then it thickened. I rolled up my windows and checked the vents, but the smell seemed to stick to the car like smoke clinging to fabric. The trees on the sides of the highway were dense now, and the faint moonlight barely penetrated the canopy. I had to keep my headlights on high beams, though even that only illuminated a short stretch in front of me. Beyond that, the night seemed bottomless. The cracks in the road became worse, jagged and sharp enough that I had to swerve around them. My tires hit a deep pothole once, rattling the car so hard I thought something had broken. I slowed even more and gripped the steering wheel tightly, feeling the vibrations shake up my arms. I told myself it was just an old road, poorly maintained, nothing more. But the farther I drove, the more I felt that tight, gnawing sense of isolation you only get when there's nothing around for miles. No houses, no cars, no lights. Just the road, the dark forest, and me. At one point, I passed a narrow bridge, the kind made of old metal beams with paint long flaked off. The rails were low, and the river beneath was just a shadowed line. The water wasn't moving much, but the reflection of my headlights rippled, as if something had disturbed the surface. I shook my head, thinking it was a branch or a fallen log. I kept moving. Then something caught my eye. A figure, or maybe just a shadow, moved across the road ahead. I slammed on the brakes, heart thudding, the car screeching slightly as the tires caught the uneven surface. My headlights swept across the asphalt, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the black stretch ahead and the trees leaning in. I waited, breathing hard, my pulse high, convinced I had imagined it. As I continued, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The road narrowed in places, and the shadows at the edges seemed to shift in ways they shouldn't. I saw branches scrape the car windows, though the wind was still. My headlights caught glimpses of shapes, rocks, stumps, and maybe animals, though nothing moved in a predictable way. Every so often, a dead deer or fox lay by the roadside, frozen in a strange posture, which made me swerve instinctively. I reached a long straight stretch where the asphalt glimmered, slightly under the light rain that had started to fall. The droplets hit the windshield in a steady rhythm, creating streaks that blurred the road. My wipers struggled to keep up, leaving small lines where the glass was clearer. In those moments, I felt like I was driving inside a tunnel of darkness and rain. The trees closed in tighter, and I realized the fog was forming just above the ground, curling around the wheels and headlights. Visibility dropped to barely 50 feet. My hands ached from gripping the wheel so tightly. My knuckles were white. The heater didn't help much, and my stomach felt tight from tension. I told myself it was just a long night drive, nothing more. I reminded myself that old highways were like this, isolated, dangerous, but nothing supernatural. Still, every instinct I had screamed caution. Suddenly, I noticed a flash of reflective material at the edge of the road, close enough that if I hadn't slowed, I would have hit it. A road sign, half bent, almost invisible in the shadows. I sighed in relief, feeling foolish, but then realized the sign was warning of a sharp turn ahead. I reduced speed further, rounding the bend slowly. The car leaned as the tires fought for grip against the slick road. For a moment, the headlights illuminated the bend perfectly. The curve ended in a small clearing, almost like a gap in the forest. Through the opening, I saw lights. Dim, yellow, far ahead, but unmistakable. A small town, or maybe a rest stop, something human and warm. Relief washed over me in a heavy, physical way. I felt my chest unclench, my shoulders drop, and my grip on the wheel loosened just slightly. The smell in the car faded, replaced by the familiar scent of heated leather and the faint trace of wet asphalt. I drove toward the lights cautiously, the road still uneven but suddenly bearable. The isolation of the old highway began to fade as I entered the outskirts. Potholes were patched, the asphalt smoother, and the trees gave way to streetlights lining the road. I passed a diner with its neon sign flickering, an old pickup parked out front and people moving inside. The warmth of life felt tangible. I slowed as I entered the town proper, turning off the old highway onto a main road that led to my destination. The tension I had carried for so long melted gradually, leaving behind fatigue and a quiet awe at how far the darkness had seemed to stretch. What had felt like endless night, with the threat of unseen dangers at every bend, was now just a memory. The road had been treacherous, isolated, and terrifying, but I had made it through. By the time I reached my destination, parked safely in a lit lot, I sat for a long moment in silence. The heater was still on, the car quiet, and outside, the town was calm and normal. Nothing had touched me, nothing supernatural, just the raw, unforgiving reality of an old highway at night. And yet, the memory of the dark stretches, the feeling of being watched, and the shadows moving at the edge of the light would stay with me for a long time. I finally stepped out, legs stiff, and walked into the safety of the building, grateful that the long, eerie drive was over and that I had returned unscathed. I had been driving for hours, the kind of drive that stretches endlessly through the night, where every mile feels the same and the darkness presses in from all sides. The highway was empty, save for the occasional distant headlights that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The road itself seemed to stretch on forever, a black ribbon winding through low hills and flat stretches of land. I remember the faint hum of my tires against the asphalt, the subtle vibration through the steering wheel, and the quiet, steady rhythm of my heartbeat, matching the rhythm of the wheels. The night was cold, though not freezing, and the air from the cracked windows smelled faintly of wet earth and fallen leaves. I was alone, really alone. There were no houses, no buildings, no lights anywhere near the road. Occasionally, a dead tree would silhouette against the sky, its branches twisting like broken fingers. The kind of trees that made you notice them only because of their shape, because the rest of the darkness swallowed everything else. My car's headlights cut cones of pale light through the gloom, revealing the road just a few hundred feet ahead. Beyond that, it was pure black. I had driven this stretch before, but in daylight. The night made it entirely different, wider, emptier, somehow more isolating. There were no sounds except my own, and I could feel the absence of everything else pressing on me. No animals, no wind, no hum of distant cities. just silence and the soft growl of my engine. I had started out thinking this drive would calm me. I like driving at night sometimes, the way it clears the mind, the sense of movement through nothingness. But tonight, something felt off. Maybe it was the emptiness. Maybe it was the way the darkness seemed to stretch forever, giving me no sense of distance or time. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, the road behind me was just as empty as the road ahead. No tail lights, no sign of any other life. I checked my fuel gauge. I had enough to reach the next small town in about 45 minutes. That should have been enough, but it didn't help the sense of isolation. About halfway through, I passed a small dirt road branching off the highway. My headlights briefly illuminated a worn sign, its paint flaking off, so old I couldn't make out what it said. The road disappeared into darkness almost immediately, a black tunnel cutting through the trees. My first thought was nothing unusual. Old roads like this appear everywhere in rural areas. But something about it made me tense. Maybe it was the way the shadows at the edges seemed to twitch for a second, like the trees had shifted slightly, though the wind was calm. I blinked, focused on the road ahead, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks. I had been driving too long, probably too tired, and the monotony of the road was making my senses sharper, more aware of small movements that were meaningless. I passed a small, crumbling overpass next. The paint on the guardrails was chipped and rusted. The concrete pillars were stained, as if water had run down them for decades. I slowed down slightly as I drove under it, my headlights catching small pieces of debris on the road, bits of rocks and scattered leaves. The darkness beyond the overpass seemed to deepen. I remember my chest tightening just a little, that familiar hitch that tells you something is wrong, even if you can't name what it is. I shook my head, telling myself it was just the night and the empty road. That's all it was. As I drove on, the road curved sharply. I had to slow down, and the motion made me notice how empty everything really was. No houses, no signs, no other vehicles. Just the road, the trees, and the sky overhead, heavy and dark. The moon had disappeared behind clouds, leaving only blackness above. My headlights felt small, insignificant, as if I was moving through a space too large for anything to exist, and that made the emptiness more pressing. I could feel it in my chest, a weight that wasn't fear exactly, but something like it, loneliness mixed with awareness of how small and fragile I was in that space. Then I saw it. Not far ahead, a shape emerged in the road. At first, I thought it was a branch or a piece of debris. My headlights illuminated it briefly as I approached. It was bigger than a branch, more like a pile of something. I slowed, carefully steering to the left to avoid it. As I got closer, I saw it wasn't just an object. It was a cow lying dead across half the road. Its body was twisted, and the fur was matted with dried blood. The stench hit me before I even fully realized what it was. I swerved gently around it, heart racing, hands gripping the wheel too tightly. I drove past it slowly, trying to shake off the sudden surge of adrenaline. The road felt colder after that, the silence heavier. My pulse was still loud in my ears. I tried to focus on the road, but the memory of the dead cow kept flashing in my mind. My headlights revealed more small shadows ahead, trees leaning in strange shapes, overgrown bushes scratching at the edges of the asphalt. I felt exposed, like something could come from any of those shadows at any moment. My hands started to sweat on the wheel, and I forced myself to breathe slowly, counting to 10 with each inhale and exhale. My mind was running through all the rational explanations, the emptiness, fatigued darkness. Nothing else could be there. I told myself over and over that I was fine. Hours seemed to stretch, though I think it was only another 30 minutes. The road turned again, long and straight this time, leading into a slight incline. My headlights revealed a narrow bridge over a creek. The water reflected faint light in patches, rippling slightly. I slowed down as I drove across, not because the bridge looked unsafe, but because it felt heavy. The night felt heavier here, more solid, as if the air had weight. My car felt like it had been swallowed by the darkness, moving through a space that had no end. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, checking the road behind me, but it was still empty. Nothing followed, nothing moved. Finally, I saw lights ahead, a faint glow almost like amber warming the edges of the darkness. My pulse began to slow. As I got closer, I realized it was the small town I had been aiming for, its streetlights cutting through the night, buildings barely visible. The sight of people, even from a distance, was grounding. The emptiness and pressure of the night road seemed to lift a little, replaced by a sense of relief. I drove into the town slowly, scanning the streets. A few cars were parked along the road, and a dimly lit convenience store marked the center. I pulled into the parking lot, shutting off the engine. The quiet hum of the car ended, replaced by distant, normal sounds. The wind through streetlights, the faint creak of signs, the occasional murmur from the convenience store inside. I sat for a few minutes, letting my eyes adjust, letting my pulse settle. The night drive that had felt endless, suffocating, and lonely was over. I had left the darkness behind, left the empty stretches of road, the dead cow, the oppressive blackness. I started the car again, now moving slowly through the streets of the town, the ordinary lights and signs and faint human life calming the tension I had carried for hours. The road, finally, felt safe. The night had been intense, but I had reached the other side. Driving into the town was like stepping back into the world, leaving the night and the lonely highway behind me. I parked near the small motel I had booked and walked inside, grateful for the light, the warmth, and the presence of other people, knowing I would sleep soundly, finally free from the weight of that long, lonely drive. I was driving late at night on a long stretch of road that I had driven countless times before, but for some reason, it never felt the same after dark. The highway was narrow and winding, flanked by tall trees on either side, their branches reaching across the road like dark fingers. The moon was hidden behind clouds, so the only light came from my headlights cutting through the thick darkness. I was alone in the car, and the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind were the only sounds. The air was cold and damp, making the windows slightly foggy, and I kept wiping them as I drove to keep the view clear. The road ahead was empty, stretching into darkness with no other vehicles in sight. I was tired, my eyes straining to focus in the low light. Every now and then, an animal would dart across the road, usually a deer or a rabbit, and I would slam on the brakes, heart pounding, waiting for the sound of it disappearing into the woods. That was normal, I told myself, nothing unusual about wildlife. But there was a heaviness in the air, a sense that something wasn't right. It was about 10 miles from the last town, and I could see the dim glow of streetlights far behind me, fading into the distance. I passed a curve where the trees leaned closer to the road, shadows pooling in the dips and hollows along the asphalt. My headlights illuminated every crack and patch in the worn road, the paint faded almost invisible in some places. I had driven this road hundreds of times, but tonight it seemed narrower, darker, more confining. As I rounded a bend, I saw her. At first, I thought it was a reflection, a trick of the light. She was standing in the middle of the road, a girl in a white dress. The dress was long, almost reaching the ground, and it was clean, bright even in the dim light. She was completely still, facing away from me. My first reaction was panic. I slammed on the brakes instinctively, my tires skidding slightly on the damp asphalt, and the car came to a stop a few feet away from where she had been. I stared, unable to move, my pulse racing. She didn't move. She didn't turn. The wind rustled through the trees, and her hair, long and dark, shifted slightly as if caught in a gentle breeze. I kept my headlights trained on her, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This was impossible. There was no sidewalk, no house nearby, no reason for anyone to be standing in the middle of this road at 2 a.m. I sat there for a few seconds, debating whether to get out of the car or try to drive around her. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I thought about calling someone, but my phone had no signal and the battery was low. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, reminding myself that this was probably someone lost, maybe a hitchhiker or a runaway teenager. I started to inch forward slowly, keeping my eyes on her. The moment my car moved, she turned her head slightly. Not fully, just enough that I caught a glimpse of her profile. Her face was pale, almost washed out in the headlights. Her eyes, dark and wide, were fixed on something in the distance, not on me. That made it worse somehow. It was unnerving, the way she seemed disconnected from everything around her. I drove even slower, keeping a safe distance. As I passed, I noticed the hem of her dress dragging slightly on the ground, wet from the dampness of the night. She didn't react as I passed, and I kept my foot on the brake, ready to stop completely if she moved suddenly. My heart was racing so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then, almost as if she realized I was there, she took a step to the side, off the road. My headlights caught her figure as she stepped into the trees, disappearing into the darkness. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were still trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. I told myself it was fine, maybe someone walking home, someone from a nearby house. But there were no houses for miles in that direction, only forest and empty fields. I continued driving, my speed carefully controlled, my eyes scanning every shadow along the roadside. The further I went, the more the feeling of unease grew. It was the way she had been standing there, almost floating in the light, completely still. It was unnatural, even though I knew it had to be human. About a mile later, I saw a small turnout by the side of the road. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled over, my hands still tight on the wheel. I needed a moment to collect myself, to figure out what the hell I had just seen. I looked back in my rearview mirror, expecting to see her figure reappear on the road, but there was nothing. No shape, no white dress, nothing at all. The road behind me was empty, as if she had never been there. I sat in the car for a few minutes, my breath visible in the cold air inside. I thought about turning back, going to check if she had wandered onto the road, but something told me not to. Whatever it wasn't safe to confront it. My rational brain was screaming that she was just a person, maybe a kid lost in the night, but my instincts told me there was more to it. I needed to get home. I started the car again and continued driving. This time I kept my headlights sweeping the sides of the road constantly, looking for any sign of movement. My grip on the wheel was tight, my knuckles white. I felt the darkness pressing in around me, the trees seeming taller, the shadows longer. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves made my heart jump. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the first sign of civilization, a faint glow in the distance, the lights of a small town. Relief washed over me, but I didn't let my guard down. I stayed alert, my eyes scanning the road ahead, my foot ready to brake at the first sign of danger. Finally, I reached the town and pulled into a 24-hour gas station. I parked under the bright lights, feeling safer immediately. The warmth of the store and the sound of people moving around was almost overwhelming after the oppressive silence of the road. I took a long, slow breath and looked back at the stretch of highway I had just driven. It seemed normal now, ordinary. The darkness didn't feel as thick, the trees no longer menacing. I realized then that I had been driving on that road for years, countless nights, and never had I felt anything like that. The girl in the white dress might have been lost. She might have been someone with trouble, but there was no sign of her now, and there was no way to know what she had been doing out there. I told myself to let it go, that it wasn't worth dwelling on. After filling my tank and grabbing a cup of coffee, I got back on the road. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but I drove slower than usual, my eyes constantly on the road, my mind replaying the image of that girl over and over. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief. Whatever it had been, I had made it through safely. By the time I reached home, the sun was starting to rise. The darkness that had seemed so heavy and threatening was gone, replaced by the soft light of morning. I parked in my driveway, got out, and leaned against the car, letting the warmth of the sun on my face calm me. The memory of the girl in the white dress stayed with me, but I knew I was safe. I had made it through the night, and that road, no matter how strange it felt, was just a road, and I had driven it alone and come out unscathed. I went inside, closed the door, and finally let myself relax. The road would always be there, but I knew I would never forget that night, or the girl in the white dress, standing silently in the middle of the highway, waiting for something that might never have existed.